Hey, this is Jamey with Stonemeyer Games, and in today's Sunday Sit-Down video, I'm going to talk about Sandbox games. This came up on a recent Facebook Live video. I do these every Wednesday where I talk about a variety of topics and answer questions, and somehow Sandbox games came up, and I thought it'd be fun to explore. So I got some suggestions in that conversation, and I'll put some of them on my list. Some of them didn't make my list because either I don't like them as much or I haven't played them, or for other reasons. Basically, before we start, I wanted to define what a sandbox game is. There are different definitions, and I think they're often confused with open world games, and some open world games have sandboxy elements. But the best definitions that I found is that a sandbox game is a game where each player is given a set of tools, and they can use those tools as they wish to do a variety of different things. And in a tabletop game, oftentimes this can manifest in a point salad game. So a game where you can get points in a variety of different ways. Games where there are multiple win conditions, multiple ways to win, or multiple ways to get those points to win. So multiple paths to victory. And where there isn't just one objective in the game. There are multiple objectives you can consider, maybe even a host, maybe quite a few objectives that you can consider. And last, I kind of added this as my own, that there isn't a lot of rubber banding. So I would not consider a game a sandbox game if you want to do X, you also need to do A, B, and C pretty well to be able to do X really well. Basically, a sandbox game, I picture it being a game where you can focus on one thing and do that thing really well and be competitive in a competitive game, even without doing some of the other things in the game. So very little rubber banding in that way. So before I get to my top 10, let me mention some games that won't be on the list. One is Scythe. Scythe, I think, is very much a sandboxing game. There are a number of different ways that you can trigger the end of the game and get a bunch of points from it. There are 10 different categories of places where you can put down stars. And the game kind of leaves it open to you as to what you want to do. It says, okay, these are the tools that you have, the resources you have. These are things that you can do, but you don't have to do any of them. You can decide to do what you want. But Scythe is a game that I designed and published, so it can't go on a top 10 list per my own rules. Two games that I think were mentioned were Seventh Continent and Legacy of Dragonholt. However, I consider these much more open world games than sandboxy games. And Seventh Continent in particular, there's like one thing the game wants you to do. It wants you to solve one specific curse. How you do that is exploring the world, but not really like on any given turn. And over the course of the games, it's not that you are given a set of tools and that you can use them as you wish. Rather, you are accomplishing a very specific goal that the game has given you. Legacy of Dragonholt, I think, is somewhat similar in that it has a very specific goal. Like in Legacy of Dragonholt, if you try to ignore the goal, you can't do anything. However, there is a very open element to what you can do, especially when you're in town in Legacy of Dragonholt. That's a lot of fun. Some games that are honorable mentions are Merchants and Marauders, Zaya, Legends of a Drift System, Civilization, and Yokohama. And games that I haven't played that would be considered for this list that were recommended to me by other people were Firefly, Impulse, and Star Wars Outer Rim. Let's jump into the top 10 list. Number 10 is Trajan, or Trajan. I'm never sure how to pronounce that, but we'll call it Trajan. This is from Stefan Feld, who's kind of the master at point salad games. And in Trajan, there are lots of little mini games. And while they are tied to each other, you can definitely, in Trajan, just focus on being really good at one of those mini games and going all in on that mini game, and you have a legitimate shot at winning. I think, from my experience playing Trajan, if you do that, just as much as if you diversify and do a lot of the different mini games in Trajan. So I think the mini games are kind of the real focus here of not just different paths to victory, but different mini games that you can just focus on and be really good at, which I think is pretty cool. And that's why Trajan is my number 10 sandbox game. My number 9 sandbox game is, gotta find on my list, Western Legends. So this is a game where you are given a map and a choice, many choices to define like if your character is going to be lawful or an outlaw. What you want to do in any given turn is pretty much up to you. There are actions that are given to you that you can take, but the game doesn't say, hey, you have to do this action, you have to do this or this. You can just choose what you want to do. I think the first time I played Western Legends, I just wanted to play poker. And so I went to the casino, or whatever it is in the game that's called the casino, and I just played poker for a few rounds and had a fun time doing that. And I got good at playing poker, and that was a viable strategy for me. So I really do enjoy how open Western Legends is in that way, that the player himself or herself can decide, hey, I just want to do this game, and I want to have fun with it, and I want to be at least somewhat competitive. And Western Legends lets you do that. That's why it's my number 9 favorite sandbox game. My number 8 favorite sandbox game is Vindication. Vindication was a Kickstarter project from a few years ago. I think I played it last year, and it's a game that has you landing on an island in a competitive game and waking up and deciding how, if at all, you want to vindicate yourself. And that if at all is a key part of it, because you can decide that you want to be good or bad. This is kind of maybe a common thread in these sandbox games, of decision of your morality in the game. But it also gives you a host of different things that you can do, and the game lets you do all of those things. You can explore, you can activate certain cards that you have, you can collect companions and pets and things like that. I've only played it once, so my memory is a little bit foggy on it, but I remember the game giving you a number of different things that you could do, and I had a good time playing it. That's Vindication, my number 8 sandbox game. My number 7 favorite sandbox game, and soon we will get to some games that I have over here on a pile, is Architects. In fact, this is one that I have. Architects of the West Kingdom. This is one that I didn't even consider at first. People have mentioned Paladins, but I thought that Architects was a better representation of a sandbox game because there are a variety of different actions, multiple paths to victory, and from the very beginning of the game enables you to choose many different paths because you start off with so many workers. The game just gives you a ton of workers that you can use as you wish throughout the game. And so I thought that was really cool that this game, that Architects of the West Kingdom, enabled the sandboxy elements by giving you a wealth of stuff to start out with. And I think maybe that is that's not the case through all sandbox games. Often in sandbox games, you have to kind of earn the things that you use. Minecraft being, I think, the classic example of a digital sandbox game. But I think it's also okay to have a sandbox game where you're just given a wealth of stuff, and the game uses that to enable you to decide your path and how you're going to play the game. So that's Architects of the West Kingdom, my number 7. My number 6 favorite sandbox game is Gugong. Gugong is a game where my favorite mechanism in the game is completely unrelated to the sandbox elements. It's the gift-giving element. But it's a game kind of like Trajan, where there are lots of little mini-games throughout the board. Some are slightly interconnected, but largely they are independent of one another. You can just be really good or have fun playing one or two mini-games and have a legitimate chance at winning the game. The game does rubber band you a little bit because there's one temple that you need to move up to the top of by the end of the game to even be eligible for winning, but I haven't found that to be a major impediment towards the sandboxy element of Gugong. And I think that's really cool. That's one of the fun things about these sandbox games. You can go into a game of Gugong, if you're learning it in particular, and say, okay, I just want to focus on these two mini games and learn them and get to know them, and then I'll ignore these other ones because I'm learning the game. I don't want to know the rules for those things yet while I'm still trying to figure out how to strategize with these two other mini games. So I think that's a cool thing about these mini game oriented sandbox games, where they do let you ignore certain things, and that reduces the barrier to entry to actually playing the game in the first place. So that's Gugong, my number 6 favorite sandbox game. My number 5 favorite sandbox game is Caverna. Caverna is kind of the big brother to Agricola, one of the first Euro games that I played. And in Caverna, I think the major difference here, the reason that Caverna is a sandbox game and Agricola isn't, is that Caverna doesn't punish you for not doing things. Caverna rather rewards you for the things that you do. So you can go all in on one or two different strategies in Caverna amongst the host of strategies in Caverna and do well in the game and have fun. Things like farming, you can go mining, you can build up your home inside the mountain. You can go after certain animals and not others, certain crops, rubies, and not other resources. The game lets you do all that, gives you the tools, and lets you play in the sandbox. And that's why Caverna is my number 5 favorite sandbox game. I wouldn't recommend playing it at 7 players. I don't know why they included it for 7 players, but for lower player counts, 3, 4, maybe 5, I think it's a fantastic game. My number 4 favorite sandbox game is one that I didn't think about at first as a sandbox until I was reading a thread on Board Game Geek, and Rogers of the Ganges, one of my favorite games, and it really does. The core thing in Rogers is that you are either gaining fame or money, but the winner of the game is the person who lets their fame and money cross over. They're paths that go in different directions around the board. And this opens up a huge sandbox element because you can completely ignore money and just be really famous, and that can trigger the end game and make you the winner. Or you can completely ignore fame and just get money. More likely, you're going to do a little bit of a balance between the two, but you could be heavily weighted towards one of those two things. And also just the things that you do on your turn. There's a variety of things that you can do in Rajas based on your player mat, the direction you go there, and just where you use your workers on the board. You can use them for again, it's kind of like a mini game thing. There are lots of different mini games. Some of them are connected, others aren't. Like you can go really far on the water track. I love going far on the water track. You can focus on getting the tiles if you want to build up your mat. You can focus on the one-time powerful abilities that are number specific for your dice. You can upgrade stuff if you want. There's a host of cool options in Rajas. Every time I play, it's different as a result. And based on those tools, you have a sandbox of things that you can do. That's why Rajas of the Ganges is my number 4 favorite sandbox game. My number 3 favorite sandbox game is one that appears on many of these lists, and that is Tzolk'in. Tzolk'in is a game where you can focus on as much or as little as you want, and pretty much have a pretty good chance at victory. You could say, okay, this is a game where I want to go after skulls, and you can just go after the skulls. This is a game where I want to focus on upgrades, or I want to focus on building tiles, or I want to focus on the cult tracks, or I want to focus on getting a lot of food by itself is probably not a viable strategy, but there are ways that you can tie food to other strategies. But Tzolk'in is the game with gears, if you don't know, and it is each of the gears is kind of its own little mini game world that you can explore, that you can get really good at doing those things. There are some interconnected things on this game, and I think the best players are probably the best at interconnecting those things. But I think Tzolk'in, like every time I play, I can take a completely different strategy in Tzolk'in. Again, it's a game that gives me the tools to do a variety of things, and the freedom for me to choose which of those things I want to do. My number 2 favorite sandbox game is A Feast for Odin. So even more than Caverna, both by the same designer, Uwe Rosenberg, I think A Feast for Odin is even more of a sandbox game, and a game that I like even more than Caverna. There are around 60 different worker placement action spots in A Feast for Odin, and they are very different things. There are games that I play of A Feast for Odin where I completely ignore 75% of those actions. In fact, there are times, there was a game, play a few months ago where I realized that I had never taken a certain action on the board. I didn't even know how it worked because I had never taken it. I didn't even know it was there. And that's the fun of A Feast for Odin. There are so many options that you can ignore some, you can pay attention to others, you can go all in on some and not others, you can get really good at certain things and not others, and all of the options are there, and there's so many options there that you may not even notice all of them the first or second or third or fifth time you play. I think that's a sign of not necessarily a great sandbox game, but it is great for me in A Feast for Odin, where there are so many options, but that you can continually discover new options, but you also aren't necessarily overwhelmed by those options. That's A Feast for Odin, my number 2. My number 1 is one that I just think really exemplifies the idea of a sandbox game. I'm sure some people will disagree with me in the comments here, but that is Magic the Gathering. The reason for that is Magic, especially in Magic Draft, and even in constructed play, Magic gives you a set of tools, and you decide how exactly you want to play them. There are tons of... there is a main victory condition in Magic, so that is the one way that maybe this isn't completely a sandbox game, but there are also a lot of alternate win conditions that you can explore in Magic. But just the idea of having tools and using them as you wish, that's what Magic is all about. You're given these a set of cards after a draft, and you get to choose those cards during the draft, and you get to choose exactly how you use them in completely different ways than the other players. The cards themselves are the tools, and there are so many different tools that you can use and combo together that every game of Magic feels like a new sandbox, especially if you're playing in the draft format. So I couldn't not put it on the list. I have so much fun doing Magic drafts, and I have fun with them because of the sandbox element, because I'm building my own thing with my own tools that are unique from the other players and pursuing victory in a very different way than the other players. So Magic the Gathering is my number 1 favorite sandbox game. I am working on a game that is both open world and sandbox. So I think those two things can be combined together. An open world is where you have a non-linear experience. You can go in many different directions, and all of them are potentially viable. With the sandbox elements of giving players tools that they can use to do what they want to do in the game. Those two things can go hand in hand, and that is happening in a game that I am working on. And I'm trying to think if there's any design stuff that I have to talk about in terms of it. But I guess I had designed one already, a sandbox game already with Scythe. And I really liked giving players the option of 10 different potential victory conditions. And even within one of those victory conditions, it's not victory conditions, but ways to get closer to victory. And letting players pick and choose the 6 that they want to pursue in any given game. And one of them is the objective cards. So even within one of them, there's a whole deck of cards that can vary from game to game. So I think that's one way, in addition to the other ways that I mentioned in this video, that you can make a game feel more sandboxy by presenting up front a number of different ways that players can either get points or achieve victory or move towards the end of the game and achieve victory, without requiring that they do all those things, and or without rubber banding some of those things to the other things. So inside, like, you don't have to get mechs if you want to pursue a strategy around popularity. Like, those are independent of one another. Sometimes they can affect each other. If you're getting mechs to have combat, that can affect your popularity. But it is your choice, and those two things aren't inherently rubber banded to each other. I'd love to hear your thoughts. I'd love to hear your favorite sandbox games. Feel free to disagree with my definition, and feel free to bring in digital games, video games, into this discussion. If you have favorite sandbox video games or digital games, feel free to mention them right alongside your favorite sandbox tabletop games. I'd love to hear examples of both. I think the two genres end up slightly different because of the tools offered to players that can be offered to players in digital versus tabletop, but they're both viable methods of offering sandbox experiences to players. So yeah, I look forward to hearing your thoughts in the comments, and yeah, take care.